Hello, everyone, and welcome to this VIDEOCAST episode. I've got Victor Black sitting, waiting for us in the backstage, and he'll join us shortly. I just wanted to remind you all that if you do want to ask Victor questions, for you to write them down in the comment section in Facebook or YouTube, and then we'll bring those up and address those questions as we can. Okay, so I'll bring Victor front stage. So Victor, hello, Victor.
Hey Matt, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on board. Okay, so Victor, you're relatively new in the UK on the kind of physique coaching, bodybuilding scene. I've kind of seen your stuff only really in the last few months, and it's intrigued me, and I've become kind of a bit of a fan in kind of the way your thought process works and the direction that you're taking things in. Almost, it's a very, for me personally, and kind of a different and fresh way of thinking about things, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a minute. But do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you, and take it from there?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. I would suggest that most people I like to use the word tribe. Most people in the bodybuilding physique development tribe probably have never even heard of me. So I'm very much the new kid on the block, even though I'm 53 years old. I have been interested in participating in physique development and bodybuilding competition for a very long time. I started training as a teenager, really, and now I am 53, still competing. But yes, I do agree. My profile as a coach, someone that is helping other people as opposed to obsessively focusing on my own needs, me sort of thing. That's something that's really I guess I've been gradually creating a profile over the last 5 to 6 years. Initially, where I live in my local region. And as word spreads around, who I am and what I'm about and what I do and the value I have to offer, yeah, I do agree. I'm starting to collect a small but let's say loyal group of people interested in what I have to say in the UK, in Australia, in the US, and in Europe in general. So yeah, it's definitely something that's been building up over the last 5 or 6 years, and we're getting to the point where now people are starting to very, very slowly click and go, oh, you're that guy. You're the. I like to position myself really as the longevity coach. The guy that's interested in helping people understand how to be the best version of themselves, and using enhancement practices as part of that process, but doing things in a sustainable manner that you can effectively be confident that you're not in it for a few years, which I think most people would agree. Most professional bodybuilders tend to have careers of 10 years or so, and then they tend to retire and fall off the scene. I've been doing this for 34 years now, so really that's my niche. That's what I'm all about: longevity coaching.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I mean, the reason why I'm kind of really interested in, well, there's a couple of reasons why, but one in particular is that it's probably similar to you. I'm not far away behind you. I'm 50 next year, and my experience of bodybuilding has been way back from my early 20s, which was the 90s, and back then the education of the people that I hung around was pretty much the bro science and just listen to the biggest guy in the gym. And that that for decades, that was what I was subject to, and that was what was the norm for me. I always, when as I got more and more experience, I kind of started to question that and think, well, why is it the case? Why do we drink 10 liters of water before a show, and why did we stop? All these kind of things. It's like I don't understand. I want to know why do we do this? So I started to question those methods. But I think this longevity coach, this anti-aging and harm reduction that you're talking about, I think is a key thing that really got me interested when, because I'm used to people alongside me taking almost whatever it takes as an amateur to just look good without really understanding the complications of what they're doing, because the guy in next to them looks good and said, just take that. But then you've come along almost with a, well, like you said, you've been doing this for almost 5 years, or establishing this kind of thing for 5 years. For me, it's fresh and it's exciting that we can start to look at maybe not just your amateur person, but you almost there's more and more lifestyle people that want to look good, and more people that not necessarily going to get on stage as an amateur, but want to do a photo shoot or look the best for a wedding, and so there are more and more people requiring a service that doesn't require, lots and lots of drugs, and negative effects to health. So for me, it's a fresh set of eyes. It's a fresh angle, and I'm really keen to dig into that a little bit more. The other reason why I'm really interested in this is I have a role in a federation. I'm keen to take that federation forward into the future, and the future being that we look after our athletes. The athletes are looked after in the sense that we have coaches that are almost part of the federation that we approve of, that look after the athletes, and so the best positive outcomes for those athletes are kind of, we're looking out for the athlete to drive out the best possible outcomes in that scenario. Because there's a couple of examples that I've got whereby coaches are only looking out for the number of trophies, and their profile will say, I've got 27 UK champions and I've got 10 pros, but it might not tell you how many lives they've ruined because they got them to stage and then just left them afterwards, and there was no post show care, and particularly the female competitors. So I'm really keen to have an approach within the federation that understands the enhancements are involved, understands that we're trying to make these people look good, and there is elements of risk, but not unnecessary risk. Not females just taking, say as a off the cuff example, 30 milligrams of Anavar, like a bikini competitor taking 30 milligrams of Anavar just because a coach said to, or taking, Arimidex or Letrozole and things like that, when they don't need to and they're just told to. So that's another reason why I'm really, really keen to explore that a little bit more.
We could probably talk about 3 hours just on those things that you mentioned there. Maybe I could just quickly address a couple of points you made there. Yeah. So firstly, it's interesting what you said about people that are outside of the sport now increasingly being interested in enhancement practices, really for what we would call image enhancement as opposed to performance enhancement, and hence the coining of the term performance and image enhancing drugs. It's being used more and more and more in the clinical literature, not just performance enhancing, but performance and image enhancement. And it was interesting, recently there was a study, admittedly it was Brazil, and Brazil is it has a body image culture, it's fair to say, that they surveyed about 5,000 or 6,000 gym goers at commercial gyms and asked them about their interest in performance enhancement, and about, I think somewhere around, I know the number's not exact, but let's just say I think it was 13%. But let's just say, somewhere in the vicinity of 15% of those individuals either had historically, were currently, or were thinking about using performance enhancing drugs. So about 15% of 5,000 gym goers were really, as I said, in the mix there somehow, either historical, current, or future use of these drugs. So this has very much moved away from where it was when I started training, which was, you would go to the gym and there would be a handful of guys in most large centers that were enhanced. They tend to kept to themselves, and they kept kept to their clique and kept their knowledge to themselves. This is very much mainstream today. Younger and younger people with less and less aspirational goals are seeking, to put their hand in this jar. And this is one of the reasons that I'm trying to be more and more higher profile, to reach as many people as I can. On top of that, I suppose there's the largest audience there is, which is men who are interested in enhancement, who historically perhaps were using 100 milligrams of testosterone a week. I don't know whether you've noticed the trend, but over the last 5 years, that dose has been growing and growing and growing to where TRT now means double that, 200 milligrams a week. And a lot of people are going, this is fabulous. Like I feel great using this. I've seen beneficial outcomes, physiological, emotional, many positive things. And they're asking the question, well, what next? What's the next thing out there that I can consider in terms of something that's safe and clinically effective to improve my quality of life? They're not necessarily even bodybuilders. They're just average guys that are interested in being the best version of themselves, and those people number in their millions. As opposed to perhaps tens of thousands of competitors. And then, as you said quite correctly, there's the whole the competitor niche. So this is a very interesting and emerging and rapidly growing market, which I would describe as this. I think it's fair to say that the true TRT market is quite well served with information today. There are some very articulate, very intelligent people putting out high quality content that relates specifically to the use of testosterone as a quality of life tool. Okay. Mm-hmm. I also think there's probably some information at the higher end of the market for the IFBB professional, the already there guy who has a coach who has decades of experience, and guys like John Meadows and things like this. They're very credible voices to listen to, but the average person can't afford someone like John and their team. Do you know what I mean? So there is a gap in the middle, a very large gap in the middle, which I'm doing my best to try and create a position where I can represent the interest of those people and provide them with the information that they need to make the right choices for them.
Nice. There's a couple of just people saying hello. Let's just shout out. Hey Jenny, how you doing? Joe. Joe
Jeffrey. Hey buddy.
Sarah, hi, how you doing? And William, hi William, how you doing?
Awesome.
Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to speak to you about was in your kind of on your website, you talk about anti-aging, and obviously this enhancement harm reduction specialist. So obviously a lot of the people that like my followers, they're not all competitors, and like we just touched on there, they are kind of lifestyle people, your average person. What does anti-aging mean in that context? What are you talking about there? Because I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at it and think, wow, if this guy can make me live longer, then that'd be amazing. So I've listened to a few of your podcasts, so I understand some of those things, but it'd be good to just talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. So I think probably the easiest first card to put on the table is if we just consider the use of testosterone as an anti-aging tool. Most people would be familiar with the idea that it's broadly accepted that as we age, we see a slow but gradual decline in endocrine hormones, testosterone, growth hormone. There are many metabolic pathways that are modulated by the endocrine system. And as we age, we tend to see, a decline in the function of those metabolic pathways. And as I said, testosterone is the highest profile, most well-known aspect of that. Most people would be familiar that, after the age of 40, as you start to see a decline, and there's also through environmental circumstances and lifestyle behaviors, and the decline in testosterone is really multifactorial why we see it. But it's fair to say that the practice of administering testosterone has become widely accepted as an anti-aging practice, specifically for the purpose of improving quality of life, one would say. So yes, there is, you know, body composition improvement that potentially comes with that. But really, it's, you know, you're talking about, you know, libido, and you're talking about, you know, emotional, you know, stability and body composition, these things. But really, you know, you wouldn't say these people are out to get jacked, if we could use that colloquial term. And of course, there are, as I mentioned, a half a dozen other metabolic pathways that beg the question, well, if testosterone has proven itself to be, you know, such a powerful tool in our toolbox in this regard, what are the other tools that, you know, we have available to ourselves in 2020 that we can look at, that there is good clinical evidence to support their safe and efficacious use? And again, the next obvious bolt-on would be something like metformin. Metformin is gaining ground almost on a daily basis as an anti-aging drug. There are, you know, a very long list of plausible benefits to use of metformin. There's also some interesting discussions to be had around, you know, does it or does it not blunt the hypertrophic effect and things like that. And I'm more than happy to talk about anything here you want to talk about. But, you know, as we go down the list, you could say, you know, we could start with something like testosterone and then talk about metformin. Potentially we can talk about, you know, a product like recombinant human growth hormone, or one of the, you know, growth hormone secretagogues. I think most people, you know, understand the basic premise of saying, look, there's a list of metabolic pathways that we have the potential to modulate in 2020 for our benefit, not even really in the intention of adding, you know, unnatural levels of skeletal muscle tissue to one's, you know, frame, just to restore the vigor and the vitality of youth, as it were. And so the discussion really begins there and then slowly escalates up from there. Really, what's quite interesting is very often they're very similar drugs. There's, you know, people that need to understand that most of the drugs that bodybuilders use, that we're using them off-label. They certainly were not developed for us. They were developed for age-related muscle wasting conditions like sarcopenia and various disease states. And we're leveraging from the anti-aging class as opposed to the other way around, which is the irony, because people see this as, I'm saying something new, but really, if you think about it practically and logically, we've been dipping into their world for, you know, 60 years almost, Jereen. Yeah. And now kind of like people are becoming more attuned to the fact that, well, I mean, I don't know about self-medication, but we see more and more anti-aging clinics, you know, being, you know, opened around the world, and specialist advice being available, and consultation, and the capacity to have prescriptions written for these drugs. So, as I said, I don't think too many people today struggle with the premise of, you know, what it means. It's the devil in the detail that people want to know. They go, okay, so I'm all ears, tell me all about this, but, you know, where do we start? People go, yes, I understand the premise, but I want to know the details here, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So say if you, how do you tackle a client that comes to you and you recognize that he or she would benefit from, you know, I mean, I would imagine that anyone that is coming to you to change, you know, visually their physique, that you would recommend some of these, almost some of them, to everybody. Now, how do you approach, say, for instance, the what's the word? There's a certain stigma, isn't there, particularly around testosterone. If we talk about steroids, and we use the term steroids, to an average person, that would soon, you know, they would not come to you if they felt that you were going to give them steroids. Now, how do you tackle a new client coming on, and with a, you know, you recommend, say, for instance, a male, completely natural guy, just a Joe Bloggs down the road, but really wants to look better for his 40th birthday, or have a photo shoot or something like that. And, you know, one of your recommendations might be, well, have your test levels checked. If his test levels are low, then you might supplement with some test, and, you know, you might add in some metformin and a couple of other things, depending on his specific goal. But how do you tackle that? How do you get over that challenge of potentially saying to him, we're going to use steroids in your, you know, how do you do that?
It's a very fair question. I guess I'm quite fortunate in so much as I would say the absolute overwhelming majority of the people that reach out to me today are basically saying, thank God someone at last that I can ask my questions. They already have the questions today. Do you know? I literally have a service where people can just book a single call. You don't need to sign up for a coaching course. You can just basically say, look, I want to book 30 minutes of your time, and we can set up a Skype call and we can talk about it together. And I honestly can say I don't really have people that ring me up that are saying, oh, like I didn't think about steroids. Quite the contrary. Most people have a piece of paper with a list of questions that they're wanting to ask about administration practices and dosages and esters and timing and I would say 99.9% of the people that are reaching out to me are people that are saying, look, I'm already down this path. I'm frustrated with the quality of information that's currently available to me. I've stumbled across some of the content you've created, or someone has recommended me reach out to you. So it's a somewhat different thing, but it is a fair question. I would say that most people that have an unknown need probably, find that need first broached by their doctor or GP or an anti-aging facility, as opposed to someone like myself. I tend to be at coming to the dialogue a little later down the track, where they're saying, right, I'm already kind of wading around the pool here and I'm fucking lost. You need to help me out with some quality information here, because I'm getting. I asked 15 people, I get 15 different answers. They all just seem to be like giving me random information off the top of their heads, and when they hear what I'm about and the information I present, they see me, I suppose, as a credible voice, and so they come to me for that purpose. Yeah.
Okay, cool. We just got a comment on what we were talking about. So it says that was a really good subject for the whole picture into fitness and bodybuilding industry, and especially for the young generation. And the young generation is something that I think, I know you recently done a post or a comment or something around advice to young people, and it was something along the lines of don't take any don't take any steroids until the age of 24, 25. I think you were advising from, if you're going to take a client, a junior on, that they would have to kind of work that natural element till they were at least 24, 25.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd put a hard number on it, but I would certainly say there's a framework. It's always been difficult. If you think about the highest profile bodybuilder that the world has ever produced, Arnold, right? Arnold clearly was messing around with steroids when he was 18 years old. Very, very obviously. A blind monkey could tell us this. So I think it's very tough to say to someone, look, the greatest champion, well, let's say the greatest champion, the highest profile bodybuilder that has ever, created, right? Very successful businessman and celebrity and things like this. It's okay for him, but you need to wait. That's a tough call to make, and you're gonna have a difficult time. But I think it's also fair to say that you have to have a dialogue on a case-by-case basis with the individual. So what I mean by that is, if someone started training, as Arnold did at 14 years old, right, and had 5 years of hard graft under their belt, and had gotten as far as, and was already competing in natural bodybuilding competitions, and was already winning shows and things like that, and came to me and said, look, I'm 19 years old and I want to start down this path, I would say, well, I'm not going to coach you, but I'm also not your mother, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm ex-military. I joined the military at 17 years old, and in my opinion, if you're old enough to go to war, you're old enough to make your own decisions about whether or not anabolic steroids are right for you. But I would not personally take on someone under the age of 24, 25 years old to coach them, because I feel responsible. I feel accountable for the outcomes that come with the use, as opposed to simply saying, well, that's your choice. You go and do that. And I can honestly say I know individuals who have done enough hard work to say, you've earned the ticket. I don't actually think it's anything to do with age. I'll be honest with you. I meet as many middle-aged men that haven't yet earned the right to take steroids, that are taking steroids, that justify it by the fact that, well, I'm not 19, I can do what the hell ever I want. I would say the same thing. I think you should, put in some hard graft for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and get as far as you can down the track, without using these tools, and then by all means leverage them open. So I don't think it's fair to say you have to be a certain age to do them. What I would say is you have to have earned the right, in my opinion. That's a very subjective and very judgmental thing to say, but hell, that is my opinion. I competed as a natural for 20 years before I touched any drugs. And I don't think anybody needs to do that. But I would argue that, if you haven't trained for a minimum of 3 to 4 years, doing it the right way, I don't know about your experience, but my first 5 years were hopeless. I didn't have a fucking clue what I was doing during. So I mean, 5 years of knowing what you're doing, and people watching this, I'm sure, will relate to that. They go, yeah, there was a point the light bulb went off, and I realized that, what I'm supposed to be. I mark it from that point forward. From that point where the light goes off and you start to understand fundamental principles, I think you should put 3 years of hard work on the table before you even think about it. Absolutely, I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
I agree with you completely. I think I see it quite often, and you probably do yourself, in gyms where guys with no real enthusiasm or interest to or it appears that way. They come in and they chat and they lift a few dumbbells while counting to 10 or 12, but not really focusing on any kind of hypertrophy. And they are taking anabolic steroids almost from the day one, because they think that that's what's going to make them bigger. Now, I agree with you totally. And maybe it's a subject that we touch on shortly, is around the food, and the food, sleep, and train. They're far more important than any kind of supplement. But the guys that you see in every gym probably around the world that are taking the steroids and not getting any benefit. There's tons of those people. So I completely agree with that statement around it. You really, if you're wanting to progress, and you need to earn the right, it's true. And you're wasting your time. You actually just might as well be, I don't know, smoking some intoxicating stuff. It's not going to do you any good. It's just,
well, I hate to look back through rose-colored glasses, but that's how it was when I was coming up. The guys who were I mentioned before, back in my early days, you would go into the gym and there would be 6 or 7 guys that were using gear. That was it. It was a small cliquey handful, group of guys that all kind of either knew each other or trained together or whatever. They would that tribe in the corner, and it was them and us, and even. They wouldn't even talk to you if you didn't put the work in. You didn't get access to the inner sanctum unless you proved that you were serious about what you're doing. And I think that was, I'm not saying that was by design. I think that was a very good thing, though, because it eliminated a lot of the problems that we seem to have today with kids jumping in too quickly. Because back then it was closed shop unless you had proven your worth, as it were. And a lot of people, I hear people complain about things like, the quality of the gear today and this and that. And the people don't understand how hard it was back before the internet. It's so easy to get your hands on a product today. It's so easy to learn about. But by comparison to what it was like pre-internet, I grew up in, rural Australia during there was one steroid dealer for every 3 million people or something. It was an insane amount of work, even just to get to a contact point where someone could offer you something for sale. Yes, I do agree. When you found that guy, the quality of the product was not a discussion. It was what it said it was. It was, he sold steroids, and when you gave him your money, you got what you want. But the point was, it was a multi-year journey in some cases just to get to the point where the bad guy was prepared to sit down and open the bag and talk to you. It's not like today where people can jump on the internet, start learning about these things, within a couple of weeks and place an order with Bitcoin. And it's so easy to get your hands on stuff by comparison today that, that earning the right, as we say, that rite of passage has been removed. And to some degree, that's a good thing, especially from the educational side of things, but it's also problematic from the, accessibility point of view.
Yeah, I think definitely. There was a question that come in earlier on Instagram, which I've added to here, which ties in with what we're talking around kind of a little bit earlier. So I'll just put it up. So it's an amateur stage bikini competitor with main drivers of health and aesthetics. Would you say natural or enhanced is best to enable a positive outcome?
I'm gonna get myself into trouble here. I, as someone that had competed as a natural bodybuilder for a very long time,
yeah,
I think that one of the greatest misconceptions about natural bodybuilding is that it's healthier than enhanced bodybuilding, and I disagree. And the reason I say that is, yes, I agree, natural training can be very healthy, but there is nothing healthy about the extremes we go to with competition. And let's just focus on men for a minute, and then I'll come back to women. Yeah. So if you take a natural male bodybuilder, legitimately natural, right, and get them to the level of conditioning that we see today in natural bodybuilding, and the level of conditioning is phenomenal at the elite level. Yeah. People need to understand that the consequence of doing that is a disaster for your hormonal profile. Testosterone is tanked, growth hormone levels are tanked, cortisol is through the roof, leptin and ghrelin all over the place. And I could very easily make the argument to say, look, some level of enhancement, thyroid level just destroyed. You could very easily make the argument that some level of enhancement is safer and better for you than natural bodybuilding. Now, the problem, of course, is what I mean by that would be, so if as a consequence of a sustained caloric deficit, you crashed your thyroid levels, then replacing that level with an exogenous source plausibly is better for you. Now, the argument, of course, is nobody actually does that. Obviously people go above and beyond that. That would be like saying, so if you're a natural bodybuilder and you crashed your testosterone levels into the toilet, consequential to getting to that level of body fat, one could very easily say that 150 or 200 milligrams a week of testosterone would be better, right? Now, of course, that's not allowed in natural bodybuilding. A lot of people don't understand that TRT is banned in natural bodybuilding for that exact reason, because it is a very clear performance advantage over the legitimately natural guy, because you don't end up with crash testosterone where it does. So I'm sure you can see the argument here. It says at extreme levels of natural bodybuilding, a one-for-one replenishment dose of these hormones could very plausibly be better for you and safer for you in the long run than crashing your hormones, every year for 3 to 4 months of the year getting ready for stage shape. That's not a healthy nor sustainable behavior, in my opinion, any more than excessive use of hormones. I believe that there is something called an inverted J curve, which basically means, in the simplest possible term, there's such a thing as too little, there's such a thing as too much, and there's a sweet spot in the middle. So very low levels of testosterone, we know there's a very long list of negative consequences to men walking around with low testosterone levels, men walking around with very high cortisol levels, men walking around with very suppressed thyroid levels. We know this to be true from a clinical health standpoint, and yet in natural bodybuilding, every year we do this over and over and over again to an extreme level for a large part of the year in terms of 30-week diets and things like this. So I hope you see where I'm going with this. It's plausible that it's actually better for you. The challenge, of course, is I don't know anybody that uses these drugs in that way. Everybody uses
what about something like insulin then? Which, if the person wasn't diabetic, and say a bodybuilder wanting to grow more muscle and obviously increase their food. And again,
a lot of the things that I say are extremely controversial, but the insulin has a role in anti-aging practice. People. I don't think people understand how insulin works. So I'm not sure if I answered that question. Am I okay to go on to the insulin discussion? You think that's a good answer for her?
You didn't answer the female.
Okay, let me just answer the female side of things, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah. So I think it's probably fair to say that they're going to be different drugs that we would deploy, but the same argument maintains. If you have significantly elevated cortisol, if you have significantly suppressed thyroid levels, if you have a disruption in general of the endocrine system, then stabilizing that through pharmacology is a very plausible, practical discussion to be had. It's not a discussion you hear very often from people, But just if you just pull that thread, you go, well, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, clearly very different hormones, and I don't know necessarily you would need to use, testosterone directly with women. I mean, it's certainly a very misunderstood subject when you look at testosterone replacement therapy in older women. As we see, testosterone-related decline in older men, we see the same thing in women as they reach menopause. So it's a conversation, and like most of these conversations, realistically, you could take any one of these threads and turn it into an hour-long dialogue, to go into every nook and cranny of it. So the statement about insulin, if you're a larger guy and you're smashing 500, 600, 700 grams of carbohydrates a day, okay, doing what we do, engaging in our behaviors, there's a very, very easy case to be made that that's not tremendously good for your pancreas. Your pancreas is working overtime trying to produce enough insulin to support that food intake. And that ultimately, as we all know, is what leads to diabetes in the first place. So most people develop a degree of insulin resistance, and coupled with a very poor diet, they end up creating stress on the beta cells of the pancreas, and over many years of this condition, they create burnout and end up the ultimate consequence of insulin resistance is ultimately type 2 diabetes. If you travel far enough down the track, how is that any different to bodybuilding? You could very easily make an argument that you could use insulin in a supportive capacity here, not even for performance enhancement, simply to take the strain off the pancreas, to say, right, well, if I simply give myself as much insulin as I would normally produce, I'm not really going to see any performance benefit. You will if you use it the right way, but let's just say it's dosage for dosage, like dosages. In theory, it's supposed to be no performance advantage, but because we can control timing and because we can, control the analog, there's definitely an advantage to doing that. But let's say there wasn't that, you could just make the argument that was a health benefit because you're taking the strain off the pancreas. So insulin has the potential to, prevent you becoming a type 2 diabetic, and yet the great irony is many people in our tribe would go, well, it'll turn you into a diabetic, and I'm going, well, quite the opposite is actually true. Is it possible through the abuse of growth hormone, through the abuse of insulin, through the escalation of insulin resistance over time to create that outcome? Of course you can, but it's not as clean cut as you use it, and that's the consequence. You can use any tool for harm or good depending on how you understand how the tool works and how you deploy it ultimately. So yeah, insulin, in my opinion, is a very valid and very viable anti-aging tool for bodybuilders who want to be smashing down large carbohydrate intakes over decades and decades. Like myself, 34 years of training, that's a lot of insulin that my pancreas has to produce. So do I use insulin? Yes, and much of what I use insulin for is to protect my pancreas.
Yeah. So. Great answer. Okay, so we've got another question in from Sarah Oldham. What is your opinion on SARMs? Okay, I know I've heard you talk about these before. So, do they have a place in bodybuilding, or is there more research that needs to be done? Sarah herself is currently a toned figure athlete.
Yep, great. It's a very good question. If you give me a couple of minutes latitude, because it's a lot of people ask this question, so I would like to give an extended answer if you can.
Sure.
If you understand that testosterone was first synthesized in about 1935-ish, and pretty much straight away, they started, trying to modify the testosterone molecule so that they could realize the clinical therapeutic benefits of testosterone without the androgen impact for the androgen sensitive. In other words, they wanted to give testosterone to women and the elderly and children, but they didn't want the androgenic consequence to come with its use. And so this is where so many of the drugs that we use today come from. The nandrolones and the primobolins and the masterons and anavars and anadrols were all really developed for women to use. The challenge, of course, were women on the, let's call it the androgen sensitive. Okay. Now, women, right, when it comes to anavar, the problem with anavar is even though they managed to, remove a very large part of the androgenic component of that drug, it's fair to say that they never completely removed the androgenic impact completely from any anabolic steroidal SARM. Okay, there's always some in the background. So the logical, extension of that conversation becomes, well, what are SARMs? SARMs are really us trying to pick up that thread and carry it down the next line to say, can we, through the use of these new chemical structures, remove that last little vestige of androgenic impact? Okay, that's really what the difference between steroidal SARMs like primobolan and a steroidal SARM like ostarine is. It's trying to get rid of that last little piece of androgenic impact. And so when it comes to the androgen sensitive, this makes perfect sense, of course. Like, who wouldn't be interested when you're giving these drugs to the elderly or to children or to women, removing that last little vestige of androgenic impact? Absolutely. And I 100% support the continued development of SARMs and the use of SARMs in that cohort. Okay. But when it comes to men, you have to understand these drugs were never even being developed for us. Give the guy testosterone. They're trying to give you the clinical benefits of testosterone without the androgenic impact of testosterone, right? So what does a man have to fear from a drug like Anavar that has the last little vestige intact? Very little. Of course, we have to worry about, issues like, okay, so it suppresses your HDL cholesterol levels, agreed. But in terms of androgen impact, for men, it is a non-issue, okay? So when I hear about men wanting to use SARMs, what for? Like, what are you worried about? These drugs are being developed for the androgen sensitive, not for you. Okay. So do I think that women and elderly people, I have a couple of clients, for example, they have their parents that are getting advice off me what their 80-year-old dad can do, sort of thing. I'm all over that. That's exactly what these drugs are being developed for. They're being developed for, like, age-related muscle wasting, sarcopenia, all sorts of disease states where elderly people, you need to minimize the androgenic impact, and with women as well. And if you look at most of the trials that are happening in human beings, outside of rat models and outside of mechanistic studies, they're actually, predominantly happening in women in breast cancer treatment, things like this. So for women, I absolutely think that SARMs are a valid and an important discussion to have. I think that they are the future of performance enhancement for women, but for men, I just think it's a mute conversation. So if I could just talk about women, if we set men aside and go, what the hell are you? Why are you even interested in that? With women, what I would say is there are a number of different SARMs that have high profile in our community, but you have to understand that they are all slightly different chemical structures. Unlike anabolic steroids, which are all derived from the testosterone molecule, many of these drugs have different chemical structures. So you cannot simply say, look, if there's a drug like ostarine, which has a significant number of successful clinical trials and it looks very promising and it appears to be safe at this point in time, that a drug like, YK11 is going to follow suit. It's like saying, Trenbolone and Anavar, they're both safe, right? Well, they're completely different drugs. Do you know what I mean? But even more profoundly so, because they're not even derived off the same skeletal structure. You have to treat them as two completely different compounds. So I would say for women, a drug like ostarine has enough clinical evidence to say at this point in time, yes, we should be using this with women. And I use it with my female clients in very small, tiny dosages. But I also think it's fair to say that that is the one SARM today that has a very long list of evidence that we can look at that says it appears to be well tolerated in women at the types of doses that they're evaluating, which is in the a few milligrams a day type range, and those are the types of doses that my clients are using. So a very long answer to that question, I apologize, but I think it's important for people to understand. For women, for the elderly, for children, yes. For men, I have no idea why you would even be interested in that. And when it comes to women, don't make the mistake of thinking because it's called a SARM that they're all safe. You need to go down the list and say some of these drugs have better clinical efficacy and safety data than others. And something like ostarine, in my opinion, there is enough there to move forward with this. There are other drugs that have never even been tested in a rat. So they're just, it's a mechanistic bench study that never even got put into an animal. Why the hell you would want to put that into your body, I have no idea. Do you know what I mean? So as a general rule of thumb, I'd say this. The first question you should ask is that SARM still in current human clinical trials? That's the first thing. Or has it been abandoned by the developers? If it's been abandoned by the developers, the obvious question is, well, why? What happened for them to walk away? Okay, so just to let you know where Ostarine is for the ladies, Ostarine recently they pulled out of the sarcopenia trial. Sarcopenia is the single largest market there is for this product, age-related muscle wasting. They pulled out and they moved their efforts over to cancer-related muscle wasting because they were concerned that the FDA wouldn't approve the hoops that they had to jump through to get cardiovascular safety profile testing done would be, too great for them to get through. So it's still a drug in human clinical trials, and we have good data. And yes, I support the use of that drug.
That was a great answer, Victor. Thank you. I think that's what Sarah was looking for. Jeffries has asked the question.
Yeah, just ignore Joe.
Joe, I'd like to hear Victor talk about the human clinical data on Trenbolone and the relationship to the failures of the HBSA, if he agrees, of course.
Yeah, Trenbolone is one of my pet subjects. Actually, I have a couple of drugs that are pet subjects. So mostly because the degree of misinformation that's in our tribe, that's in our community, and Trenbolone is one of these drugs where it's just, you talk to guys and they start talking about Trenbolone, just going, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. There's so much misinformation of Trenbolone. It's crazy, right? What a lot of people don't understand is that when Trenbolone was in human clinical use, it was deployed for the very reason I mentioned before about the development of these compounds. It was developed for use in the androgen sensitive. So it was actually given, very few people seem to know this, but it was actually given to women and the elderly for, indications like malnutrition and osteoporosis. Okay. So in other words, in the 90s, if your mother lived in Europe and she had osteoporosis, there's a plausible chance she would have been administered Trenbolone as part of her line of action for that treatment. And yet you think about it, does that line up with anything that we know in our tribe about Trenbolone? This is the most powerful androgen that exists, 5 times more androgenic than testosterone, for example. So I think people just, I don't know where they get their information half the time about drugs, but Trenbolone is one of these classic examples. If guys can understand this, and that is, Trenbolone is a steroidal SARMs, which places it in the same category as Primobolan and Anavar and Anadrol and Nandrolone, in so much that it is less androgenic than testosterone. And it when it was in human clinical use, it was given to the androgen sensitive. Okay. The challenge with it, of course, is that the dose that they gave them was quite small, and relatively speaking. The typical dose was 50 milligrams every 10 days. So you're talking, basically 5 milligrams per day if you break it down. Obviously, the delivery profile is somewhat skewed because of the ester, but let's just, for the sake of simple maths, 5 milligrams a day was the dose. Okay. So is it true that as you escalate the dose, you change the androgenic anabolic profile of these drugs? Well, yes, that's true, but ironically, that's true of almost every anabolic steroid we have as well. This is one of the reasons when you look at the clinical data for SARMs, you have to ask the question, why are they testing 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams? Why don't they give them 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams? Because they have to keep the dose low enough so that the androgenic, impact of the drug doesn't present itself. Because as you raise the dose, you start to skew the profile. So it is true that as you use more and more and more Trenbolone, that you start to have a differential effect. The myotrophic ratio starts to skew somewhat, but that's true of pretty much all of our drugs that are steroidal SARMs. So I don't know if that answers the question, but at the end of the day, Trenbolone is a steroidal SARMs. It is not more androgenic than testosterone, and the problem I have with Trenbolone in general is that it is actually a steroidal progestin. Most people are familiar with the fact that it has the potential to bind to the progesterone receptor. And that's where many of the problems come from Trenbolone. Trenbolone binds to the progesterone receptor. And anyone that studied anything about hormone replacement therapy in women would understand that pregnenolone, is actually cognitive protective. It's very good for your brain, especially in women. Yeah. But steroidal progestins, when they give women progestin in a synthetic form, as it were, we lose that cognitive protective effect, and it starts to have negative effects on the brain. And this is where most of the people that talk about consequence of use of trenbolone and issues that they're having, it's cognitive. They have stuff going on their head. People will say that drug gets inside your head, and it literally does. But it doesn't do that because it's an androgen. It's not because it's so strong. It's because it's a steroidal progestin, and because it binds with the progesterone receptor. That's what's going on with the mental health. That's what makes you sweat at night. That's what makes you go on with the cognitive function issues. It's the fact that it's a steroidal progestin as well as an anabolic steroid. Cool.
Okay, cool. Okay, so whilst we're waiting for more questions, Victor, now is a good opportunity to talk about some of the services that you offer, how people can, you already touched on it before around offering consultations to people. And I think we'll explore that in what that means in a minute, but I think that's a great, I know Joe does consultations as well, but I think it's a good opportunity for someone to get some good information in a short space of time. So let's talk about that service and some of the benefits that you found clients getting from that service, if you feel free to.
Yeah, so obviously I offer, I guess what I try to do is I try to meet the needs of my clients. Like any good businessman should, like you need to find out what your client wants and you give them that, right? But I believe that a lot of people that haven't used a coach before, or people that are, they're kind of on the fence a little bit, that they're going to be somewhat resistant to laying down hundreds and hundreds of dollars up front, signing up for 3 months of coaching, as it were, because they want to get feel you out, get a feel for you. So I actually offer a service. I don't know, how many other coaches do this. I'm probably not very well connected to what other people do, but I basically offer a service that says, look, you can just book 30 minutes of my time. So I have an application on my website. You can see the availability of my diary, and as long as I have a slot available, you can book in 30 minutes, and we set up a call on Skype, and you can book at a time. All I recommend people do is to make the best use of your 30 minutes. What makes sense is that you have a list of questions prepared. I do have people that come to me and they say, I don't really know what I want to know. I want to know everything, if that makes sense. And although I'm very empathetic to that, that's going to take longer than 30 minutes to answer. Obviously, that becomes an ongoing mentoring relationship or an ongoing coaching relationship, as it were. But for people that are saying, right, I'm having these side effects, I'm having elevated blood pressure issues, I've got kidney dysfunction issues, I have sexual dysfunction issues, I have fertility issues, I have hormone related acne, and all the way down, I don't sleep well, whatever possible consequence, whatever people want to talk about, I happen to talk about anyone, about anything. There's no subject that's taboo in my opinion. I talk about erectile dysfunction, I talk about fertility issues, baby making protocols, whatever the client wants to talk about. But literally, you can just book in a 30-minute call. Let's just get stuck in. If I can answer your question in 30 minutes, I will do my best to do that. Most people can tell I talk very quickly, so we can get a lot covered in 30 minutes. But I unashamedly do it for a couple of reasons. I think it's me giving back to the community, something that's affordable and helping to get information out there. But it's an opportunity for people to see how I work as a coach, and it helps to grow my coaching business. A large percentage of people that take those calls then go on to become, at some point, clients of mine. So, yeah.
Have I got the website right there at the bottom of the screen? VictorBlackMasterclass.com.
That's correct. I actually had I historically had a website called muscleandiron.com. It still redirects from that, but Facebook, because so many people complained about what I talk about, like, oh my God, he's talking about steroids. They blackballed me, so I can't use my my old domain on Instagram or Facebook anymore. So I've had to register a relatively new URL. So either the old muscleandiron.com or VictorBlackMasterclass.com, both of those redirect to the same site. Yes.
I mean, so we've got roughly, well, we can go on a little bit longer, but I know it's late. And what time is it there where you are?
It's just going 1:30 a.m. But I'm fine if you want to keep going. If there's people that have questions, let's just keep going for a little bit. If you're happy.
I just wanted to touch on the the consults, really, because you touched on some really, really important topics that people would never just associate with bodybuilding or a bodybuilding coach. And I think a lot of the people that do follow me are not, or would never dream of doing a bodybuilding show, but they do want to, like we discussed before, lifestyle people. But I often get, excuse me, I often get questions like that, and I think, you know, an opportunity to be able to come to someone like you who, you know, the whole list of topics there that you run off the top of your tongue is they're quite a you know, most of them are very important issues, and I think it's, you know, for the people watching, I think that's a great opportunity to you know, to speak to Victor in 30 minutes and get some of those answers from an expert. So please do take that up and inquire with Victor if you do have any issues. So Sarah Oldham has come back again with a long. So she's been looking into the benefits of L-carnitine and was reading about where they gave it to older people who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And both her parents, her dad is in her 80s and mum is in her 60s, have been diagnosed with it in the last year. What is your view on L-carnitine to help delay the symptoms and also to maybe help her now, as it seems I'm probably going to get it by the looks of it? So what she's looking is for herself in the future to prevent her from maybe getting it hereditary in the future.
Yep, that actually, it's interesting. You said most people wouldn't associate things. I'll just drop a couple of notes and come back and ask a question. A lot of people are not familiar with the fact that there are multiple toxicologies associated with the use of androgens and performance-enhancing drugs in general, right? Most people are familiar with the potential impact on the renal system, the kidney system, the liver, the heart, your lipid skewing, the artery system, etc. Very few people are aware of the impact that anabolic steroids have on the brain, and there are many studies. I'm not talking about one. There's a lot of evidence to talk about now about the negative consequence of elevated androgen levels on cognitive function. It's worrisome. Let's say that, Joanne. And I would encourage anyone that is using these compounds that is not aware of the potential negative consequences on your long-term mental cognitive state, consequential to elevated androgens. You need to spend a little time looking into this, and it's a very serious subject, and it's something that I'm very interested in and learning more about every day. But make no mistake, we have overwhelming evidence to support the fact that there is a compound and dosage related association of issues in this domain. Let's just broadly say that. So moving on to Alzheimer's disease, I don't know whether Sarah's aware of this or not, but relatively recently there was a couple of papers that suggested that they, for the first time, have actually started to see a potential, quote unquote, treatment model for Alzheimer's disease that shows really positive effect, which is really exciting. Now, the challenge with it is the treatment model is not a pharmacology-based solution. So, for example, most people would be familiar that we have a cure for obesity. It's called calorie restriction and exercise. And yet, today we live in a world where we have an obesity epidemic, right? So, just because we have a treatment model for Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't mean that people are going to follow the model, because what the model basically requires is nutritional intervention, exercise, management of blood glucose levels, which is something again that's at epidemic levels, type 2 diabetes, and then potentially all of the issues of oxidative stress management and so the treatment, the prevention model. Let's talk about the prevention model at this point in time is multifactorial. I would say that if you are interested in this space, and I'm very interested in this space at my age, that you need to be mindful that it is not a silver bullet solution. It is multifactorial, and it is very much like about health, where it begins with quality nutrition, an appropriate exercise program. There is a very good argument to say that some level of enhancement is potentially supportive. So drugs like metformin, drugs like testosterone. Testosterone is cognitive protective at moderate levels. So if you look at testosterone, you say the inverted J curve again, too little testosterone has the potential to exacerbate these, cognitive function disease states. Too much testosterone has the potential to exacerbate these cognitive function disease states, and there is a sweet spot in the middle. Growth hormone levels, insulin levels, these are old friends that we deal with modulating in our tribe. But, we need to be mindful of those things. And then comes, what I would call tertiary solutions like L-carnitine. I'm a huge fan of injectable L-carnitine. I think it's fabulous. And I think it's one of the most underrated performance enhancement tools there is, bar none, given what it costs and the risk profile attached to it. It is literally just the amino acid L-carnitine that you can buy at your local GNC shop, but it's suspended in a sterile water solution so we can inject it, so we improve the bioavailability of it massively. A hugely underrated PED, in my opinion, and we can talk about that. But the point I'm making is anyone that's interested in a prevention model or a treatment model for Alzheimer's needs to take a holistic approach, okay? And it's a little bit like obesity. Everybody's chasing the great obesity drugs, and we have a half a dozen very, high-quality pharmacological fat burners available to us today. Products like Orlisat, products like, there's a couple of chemical uncouplers, which are in the DNP family that are still being evaluated for clinical use in obesity, but people don't understand they don't fucking work unless you control calories. You can't just continue with your existing behaviors and take these drugs. That's not how they work. So if you follow that methodology, if you follow that model, it's very easy to take that over to Alzheimer's prevention disease and say you have to do everything. You have to look after stress management. You have to look after sleep hygiene. You have to look after nutritional practice. You have to look after insulin sensitivity, and you have to look after your hormonal profile. And then you can start layering on, drugs that are potential either, treatment or preventative models for these disease states. I fully support them. I think they're fabulous, but they're an absolute waste of your time, an absolute waste of your money, in my opinion. And if you don't have the underlying foundation in place, in exactly the same way as if you don't fix your diet and you don't introduce a reasonable exercise regime, what is the point of taking Yohimbe? What's the point? It's not going to work. Yeah. So that whole subject of cognitive function is I'm sure you can imagine that's a thread you can pull on and end up in a 3-hour podcast. It's absolutely fascinating. And if there's one takeaway from it here today, it would be simply this: a lot of guys that use these drugs are simply not even aware of this data. They're just not even aware of the toxicity on cognitive toxicity and why we have these problems, and the role that estrogen plays as a protective, component, the role that DHT, plays. And this is why I'm not a fan of things like nandrolone-only cycles. People think estrogen is the enemy. Estrogen is not the enemy. It's good for your gains. It's good for the bedroom. It's good for your heart. It's good for your brain. It's good for so many things. So any drug strategy that basically suppresses, estrogen, whether it be the use of an aromatase inhibitor or the use of, non-aromatizing drugs or less aromatizing drugs to modulate estrogen, I don't support those strategies any more than I support the idea that DHT is the enemy. DHT is an endocrine hormone that has a job to do, and we need to modulate it. We don't need to annihilate it. So I don't support DHT blockers either. So I apologize if I talk very quickly, and hopefully guys can understand. If I touch on a thread and people want to know more, you can go to the website, learn more about what I have to offer there, or just book in a call, and we'll go through whatever you want to talk about at a pace that people can absorb information that's right for them.
Sarah said thanks, Victor. She really appreciates your input. And just just what you're talking about then, excuse me. You talking about the website and more information. I have seen where you've got information packs or things that people can buy and on a specific topic or subject. I'm right on, Ivor. Do you want to explain that for me a little bit?
Yes. So I think it's one of the things I pride myself on is being very transparent. I produce a certain amount of free content, just like this podcast. I want to answer people's questions and give them value for their time. People's time is the most valuable thing they have. So if people are willing to give me an hour to listen to me talk on, I want to give them value. But at the end of the day, almost everything I do on social media is designed to drive people back to my website, and it's at my website where the entirety of the conversation takes place. So in other words, there is a website there that is a membership-based website that you become a member, and then you can access all of my posts and all of my videos where I spend many, many, many hours going down the rabbit hole on each of these discussions. So, you know, I guess these types of conversations are designed to create awareness more than anything else, because a lot of people often hear me talk about things like they go, you know, DHT is cognitive protective, estrogen is cognitive protective, and people go, well, I need to know more about that. That's not enough. You stop talking, you went on to the next subject, and I go, well, obviously that then leads you onto the website where we have, you know, an ongoing conversation that may last another hour about that specific topic. So yes, the website is literally a members access area where you pay to become a member and get access to everything I have to say on these subjects.
Okay, brilliant. So before we wrap up,
can I just throw a couple of things out there if I can? I wanted to offer some value for your listeners, if that's
sure,
right.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm extremely passionate about is trying to communicate this simple fact, and that is today, most of the information that is communicated to our community is the legacy of the genetically gifted. In other words, you know, if Dorian did it, it's right. Right? And I don't get me wrong, I was a huge fan of Dorian. I went through this phase myself where I remember making an ass of myself and getting into arguments about people because, you know, Dorian did it, it's right. That's it, right? But it took me a very long time to understand that most of what we are taught is really what the genetically gifted do. And I am not going to sit here and say it doesn't work, because very clearly it worked for them. But it took me a very long time to realize that much of what the genetically gifted do work for the genetically gifted, and initially it didn't work for me. And so I had to find out what worked for me. And I started finding, you know, this common thread amongst other people that say, look, you know, I've tried this and I've tried this and I've tried that. And I'm frustrated, disappointed that I don't feel like I get a return for my investment. I'm doing everything Ronnie tells me to do and it's not working. And so I think most people can kind of relate to that. They go, you know what, I'm dedicated, I'm focused, I put the time in, I spend the money, I do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm actually emulating these great champions our sport has, yeah. And I think it's also fair to say that, you know, every endeavor, it doesn't matter whether it's playing the piano, playing the guitar, or playing golf, there's something we recognize as natural talent, innate talent. There are individuals that go out there and pick up the guitar and they just start playing the guitar. No one even needs to teach them. They have an ear for the music and they can hear it. Like I've tried to play the guitar and I am absolutely hopeless at playing the guitar. It would take me 10 years to learn to play the guitar at the competency level that someone was talented might learn in 3 months. And I equate this very similar to what we do. You know, like you see it all the time. You know, so I don't for a moment suggest that genetics should limit your having goals. Very often what happens is you need to change the time frame. So it might take Jimi Hendrix 6 months to play the guitar, and it took me 10 years. Do you know what I mean? And I don't even think that's excessive. I mean, if you think about a lot of this, how long does it take to learn to play chess at a competency level? I'm sure there's some Russian school kid somewhere that just learned and he could probably beat me after 10 years and he'd been playing for 6 months. I'm sure that kid exists. Yeah. But the point is that if you listen to that kid about how to learn, he's going to tell you what worked for him rather than necessarily what I do. And many of my messages then relate to what I would call the less than genetically gifted. I am by no means a genetically gifted individual. I'm just an average guy. I don't consider myself either blessed nor cursed. And literally, if people are interested in finding out more about nutritional practices and the difference between what the genetically gifted do and what I recommend people to do, or training practices and what the genetically gifted do versus what I think you need to do, or time frames, or drug protocols, or you know, I'm more than happy to talk to those types of things to anybody. But in general, what I would say to people is that, you know, you need to be very mindful that you don't blindly follow the guidance and the input from people who are just talents in this business. It works for them, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you all the time. And the training program that you're currently doing with Joe is a good example of that, where we've spent really the last 3 months just training our legs. Okay? So you don't see IFBB professionals training that way, and the main reason you don't see that happening is because they don't need to. So there are so many aspects. I'm maybe at some point in the future we can come on and we can talk some more about training and nutrition and things like that. But for anyone out there that's struggling, that's frustrated with their progress, the first checkbox I would have, the reality checkbox, is just make sure that you're not emulating your idols, because I did that for a very, very long time, and all it did was frustrate me because I did everything they told me to do and it didn't work for me, right? And I would, if I could save someone the 10 years that I spent going down that track, I think that would be a fabulous thing. Just if you give it 2 or 3 years and you're not seeing fabulous results after 2 or 3 years, something's wrong. Don't spend 10 years like I did. So if you spend 2 or 3 years and it's not working, very often you have to tick that box and go, let me just go back and make sure that I'm not blindly following the rule books for the genetically gifted as opposed to the rule book for the average man. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to talk about the Black Death training protocol, and if you want to briefly talk about that a little bit more, I'm happy to carry that on just for a few minutes.
Let's just maybe I'll give you another 15 minutes and because I don't want to drag the conversation. I could talk about this for 3 days. So let me just explain something about nutrition and training that I don't think a lot of people understand, and that is, when you're less than genetically gifted, the rate at which you can accumulate skeletal muscle tissue is principally limited by your capacity to do a number of things. One is your recovery capacity, but also your capacity basically to ingest nutrients and to utilize nutrients in a constructive manner. So one of the things you'll see genetically gifted guys doing is having very high levels of caloric intake over surplus, 1,000 calories, 1,500 calories over maintenance levels, and they do very well at it. They just seem to be able to utilize that substrate intake very efficiently. For myself, because I don't grow that quickly, I have to have a different model that says, if you're familiar with the concept of reverse dieting, where you get down to stage weight and then you very gradually come out of that diet back to initially maintenance, it's somewhat similar to that model. But let's say we begin at maintenance level and we very slowly and incrementally increase our caloric intake over time. Okay, so it's not this huge digital jump from I was dieting yesterday or I was on maintenance and now here's another 1,000 calories take there. Because when I did that, which is again the methodology that many of these guys get away with, I just got very fat very fast. That's what happened with me. So I learned that I needed to be a micromanager as a less than genetically good. I had to focus on very small incremental details of things. I had to break things down into smaller chunks, as it were, get more granular. And that's really the concept behind the Black Death training program. It's basically saying, look, if you're not genetically gifted, you have a limited systemic recovery capacity of approximately 100 hardworking sets a week. Okay. So you can choose to allocate those 100 working sets a week equally across your whole body. Let's say there's 8 body parts: back, chest, arms, okay. Or what you can do is you can choose to allocate that 100 hard-working sets in a disproportionate manner and focus on the development of one body part for a block of time, and then move on to the next and move on to the next and move on to the next. And the best analogy I would say is it's something like training a triathlete. You can either spend an equal amount of time in the pool, on your bike, and in your running game, or you can say, look, I'm going to minimize running time and going to minimize bike time. I'm going to really, really focus on my pool game for the next 12 weeks because I really need to bring up my pool game. And then when I've seen some improvement in the pool, then I'll move on to the next, the next aspect of my event and the next one, So you go through this rotational program of let's improve that and then move on to that and then move on and then cycle back around. Whereas a genetically gifted individual can train his legs and his chest and his back and his arms and his shoulders and grow them all at the same time. I found that for the less than genetically gifted, it's far more helpful just to, focus on one body part for 3 months. Now, I said, I'm the first person to admit you will never see an IFBB professional recommending or following that model. But the reason behind that is they don't have to. They can make everything grow at the same time because they have significantly greater systemic recovery capacity than us mere mortals. So when you have a reduced systemic recovery capacity, in my opinion, this is why I developed this model to say, we're going to get to chest, but let's bring your legs up first. And this is where, I don't know how you've done over the last 12 weeks, but Joe's put 2 inches on his legs in 12 weeks, which is a remarkable feat. Now, if you said, well, yeah, but how much has he grown his arms and his shoulders and chest? Nothing. It's that 12 weeks wasn't about that. We're about to move on to shoulders and arms, and he'll see a result consequential to our shifting of focus, and then we'll go to chest and back, and then we'll cycle back around again. Now, every model has a price. The price of this model is potentially your long-term progress is slower than if you grew everything at the same rate. But you can see my logic behind this, and that is, if you can do that, you should do that. But if it's not working for you, then take a step back and say, well, maybe I just need to focus on one thing at a time, and bring my arms up, bring my shoulders up, bring my back up, bring my chest up, and then cycle back around and bring them up one at a time. So that's what you've been going through with Joe, I understand. And in my experience, it works extremely well for guys that are either less than genetically gifted or guys who are older and have become somewhat anabolically resistant with age, or with guys that are close to their genetic potential, where they're kind of capped out almost, and they're kind of saying, I want to keep getting better, but like we redistribute our total systemic work capacity just to one body part at a time. It's not black magic, it's not voodoo. It's very simple, logical, practical, well thought through model if you think about it, and when you execute it, it makes a lot of sense. But again, it's something that you very rarely hear seen or done in practice in gyms. Most people are training push-pull legs or upper-lower split, or the bro split, where you fundamentally are giving a very similar amount of volume load to each body part in turn over the course of a week.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about genetic freaks, almost, you're talking about a very, very few people in the whole planet. So when you say us mere mortals, you're talking about the majority of people. So most, if not all, people listening on this podcast are not those genetic freaks, and so it applies to pretty much everybody, almost everybody. In the gym, apart from those very, very few. And I haven't seen one in my gym, one of those genetic freaks in my gym. I do get to see them every now and again when I travel around, but they're not common. So this is a protocol that really does apply to the majority of people. I kind of, when I spoke to Joe about this, for me, I had a different reason to kind of go into this, because it was legs. I in the last few years diagnosed with severe arthritis in my hips. So over time, I kind of neglected certain exercises, and my leg size is obviously, as you would imagine, diminished. So for me, it felt like a good choice to try to build up a little bit of leg volume. And for me, the interesting thing is that it's been really, really useful for me, because I think mentally I'd almost succumbed to the fact that my legs were never going to grow again, and I couldn't do certain exercises. But picking just specific exercises and focusing on those specific exercises week in, week out, and using the progressive protocol, it honestly, I'm only in round 2, so the second wave of, so I'm on probably week 6 of active work. So the second week of the second round, and I've grown about 4 centimeters in my legs.
Wow. That's good, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. But not just the growth. I mean, obviously that is a major factor and the reason why I wanted to do this. But it's improved my whole physique in a number of ways, and I think just the I think getting over the kind of stuff, I think it was just I'd not giving in, because I'm not the type of person to give in, but I just thought, well, my legs have gone. But to put 4 centimeters on in almost 6 active weeks, that's incredible, and I've still got another 6 weeks to go. So if I can put another 2 centimeters on, that is amazing. So the actual protocol for me, it really works. It's very simple. It allows you to focus on form more. So I think when you're going into push-pull and you're doing random exercises week in, week out, it's hard to progressively, it's hard to maintain that progressive overload easily, because of the variation in exercises. And sometimes I think, even as an experienced lifter, when you go from a different machine to another machine or a free weight, you lose focus slightly, and you lose connection with the muscle and form. Whereas when we're repeatedly doing this, it's day one, or legs A, whichever, how you've broken it down. It's the same exercise repeated every single week. So it's the contact, the connection, the progression. It's all just it's the simplest program to follow that I've ever done, but it's the most effective, I think, that I've ever done, and it's the most rewarding because of the gains that have come, that I'm getting from it. There was another thing I was going to say there. It's
can
also.
Can I just throw something in there, a comment about you, mate, because it's a really, really profoundly important thing. A lot of people associate DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness, with fabulous outcomes. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, I know people are actually trained to chase DOMS, if you understand what I mean. They see that as a proxy for muscle growth. And what people don't realize is the underlying cause of DOMS is actually damage to the Z buffers between the muscle fibers. Okay, so if you start a new exercise and it's a novel stimulus because it's not the way that you've historically done something, and in the first few training bouts you experience DOMS, that's consequential to damage of the Z buffers. Anyone that doesn't understand what if you go on Google and look up Z buffers, you'll see what Z buffer is. But basically, it's where the muscle fibers themselves connect together. Okay, so after a few training bouts, that pain subsides. Yeah. And you can kind of get on with your training a little bit. A lot of people feel that when they lose that sensation, that the training is not as effective anymore. But what a lot of people don't understand is it's not until the Z buffers heal that you can start growing tissue. So whilst you're experiencing DOMS, nothing is happening. And then after the DOMS, the tissue growth occurs. And then you change. So a lot of people, they do an exercise, they experience DOMS, they go, yeah, it's all good, it's working, and then it starts to fade, and so they change exercise, thinking that, oh, it's not working anymore, and they don't understand, but that's when the muscle starts to grow. This is why you need to stick to the exercise, especially a complex exercise like, say, a squat or a compound movement, for at least 10 to 12 weeks. You cannot jump from one to the other, because the first couple of weeks you will experience a degree of soreness associated with that exercise, and that is the Z buffers basically being adapted to the stimulus. And once they are adapted, then the load goes more to the muscle fibers than to the Z buffer damage. I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but there's a period of time where initially where you experience soreness. As I said, a great many people say that soreness is akin to tissue growth, and they don't understand. No. It's when that soreness starts to basically, subside, the tissue growth can begin. So if you're experiencing DOMS, this is a good thing, because it's saying, okay, I'm on my way. But it's only once the DOMS starts to really truly subside that you will actually start to experience true hypertrophy of the muscle tissue itself. So don't change your exercises too quickly, guys. 10 to 12 weeks.
Well, that's when you were talking about mistakes that you made over a 10-year period. That were kind of where I went wrong. Was I trained to almost like I didn't wasn't chasing the DOMs, but what I was doing was annihilating myself every single time to go to complete failure, and then change the exercise to the next one, and consequently every single week have DOMs in a different body part. So that's where I went wrong, and it's so common now. I see guys, just randomly doing exercises to the limit, to failure, but then the next week they're doing a whole set of different exercises to failure. And yeah, thanks for explaining that. I mean, the thing I was going to say, it's come back to it. Even though all those positive outcomes of the Black Death, this is a tough workout, and
it's brutal.
It's brutal, but I know what you're going to say. It has to be brutal. You've got to do that work to get the outcomes, and that's another reason why I like it, because I am used to training hard, but I'm used to training hard and not getting the outcomes. So me putting a lot of effort into this and getting some serious outcomes, for me is a win-win situation. I'm all for going and putting more and more effort in. So most of us are those DOM chasers, people. If you want to really try to add some tissue, and really want to push yourselves hard, then the Black Death devised by Victor is definitely a program that you want to give a go. Fully endorsed by myself, and obviously Joe Jeffries is having really good results from it himself.
Yeah, it's not. I didn't make it to be easy. I'm not gonna lie to anyone and say, look, this is an easy way to tissue growth. It's a ball breaker, but it's a simple, logical, no voodoo, no black magic, very easy to understand, very easy to execute model that it just works. It just works. Simple as that. Yeah.
That's the beauty of it, Victor. I think it is very simple, it's very logical, and it's very effective. More than any other training protocol that I've ever done. So I do appreciate you for passing that on to Joe, and for allowing me to do it.
Cool.
Okay, so I know it's very late there now, and it's time for your bed. So Victor, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and really interesting. I think we covered a lot of ground there, and I think it would be good to bring you back and talk about a specific topic. I know, like you said before, focus on a more detail, go into detail on one of the topics, but maybe a bit further down the line we can bring you back and have you on and talk in something in more detail. But really thank you for coming on and helping the guys who joined in today. Great,
thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, Matt. Thank you very much, buddy.
Okay, if you just stay backstage for me a second, Victor, I'll say goodbye to you. I'll just say, I'll just do a little thingy. Just bear with me. Okay, so, just bear with me, guys. Okay, so thanks for joining us this week. My next guest is Ella McChrystal. She'll be in 2 weeks' time. Just follow my page for all the details around that, and I'll see you soon. Okay, goodbye.
Big boy.